This girl hired a hitman to get rid of her parents because they were too strict. The story starts off when Jennifer Pan and her parents immigrated to Toronto for a better life. Jennifer was a straight A student all the way until the 8th grade. That's when she thought she would become valedictorian, but when she didn't, she decided that school is not worth trying if she's not going to get the acknowledgement she thought she deserved. From then on, she began failing high school and changing her report card so that her parents won't find out. After high school, she faked a college acceptance letter, telling her parents she would accept and go to college when in reality, she didn't graduate high school. Since she lived with her parents, she would pretend to go to class every morning, but instead go to a friend's house or go to the library where she would copy down fake notes to show her parents what she was learning. After 2 years of fake college, she told her parents she would transfer to the University of Toronto where she would live with her friend Topaz. Until one day when her parents decided to call Topaz to ask about Jen, and Topaz told them Jen is not living with her. When she came home that night, her parents confronted her. You won't believe what happened next. This girl hired a hitman to get rid of her parents because they were too strict. Part 2. Sorry for the wait. After confessing that she has been lying to her parents for over 4 years, they forgave her on the condition that she goes back to high school and gets her education. But they also restricted her more, no longer allowing her to use a cell phone or laptop and making her cut ties with her only close friend named Daniel, who had helped her deceive her parents for all this time. This is when she really began to despise her parents. Later that night, Jen met up with one of her old friends, and as they were talking, her friend mentioned that she sometimes wishes her parents were gone. This got Jen thinking, and later that night, she decided that the only way for her to escape her parents' rule is to get rid of them. Eventually, she began talking to Daniel again, who told her he knows a guy nicknamed Homeboy who can get rid of her parents for $10,000. She accepted the deal, and Homeboy began stalking her parents. On November 8th, she texted Homeboy and told him to do the job once her parents got back from work. This story gets so much crazier, but no more waiting because part 3 is out now. This girl hired a hitman to get rid of her parents because they were too strict. Part 3. You're not ready for this. Later that night, her dad, who was tired from working, went upstairs to sleep while her mom sat downstairs in the living room watching TV. Jennifer then texted Homeboy and told him the go signal would be when she turns her bedroom light off. She then went downstairs to the living room to say goodnight to her mom, unlocked the front door, and went back upstairs and turned off her bedroom light. At that moment, Homeboy and 2 other guys entered the home, brought down Jen and both her parents to the living room, and tied them all up. They then began yelling, asking them where's the money while holding them at point to make the parents think that it was a robbery. As they yelled, the parents continued to beg them not to hurt their daughter, not knowing that she was the one behind all of it. After scaring them, they took both her parents down to the basement, where they sent 2 rounds into her dad and 3 into her mom. After scaring them, they took Jen back upstairs and both parents down to the basement, where they emptied 2 rounds into the dad and 3 rounds into the mom. The 3 hit and then quickly ran away as Jen called the cops, claiming that they had been robbed. Part 4 is out now. This girl hired a hitman to get rid of her parents because they were too strict. Part 4. But what she didn't know was that the hitman had actually failed. Although her mom unfortunately passed away, her dad survived and crawled out of the basement onto the street, where he began yelling for help. Jen could not believe her eyes as she saw her dad through her window running out into the street calling for help before collapsing. At this point, many of the neighbors had woken up due to the commotion and have called the cops after seeing her dad's condition. When the emergency services finally arrived, they rushed her dad to the hospital, where he fell into a coma, and took Jen in for questioning. They ended up releasing her as they had no reason to be suspicious. But only 3 days later, her dad ended up waking up from the coma, and he remembered everything. He told police that as the hitmen were tying them up in the living room, he remembered Jen having a casual conversation with one of the hitmen as if she already knew him. They took her in for questioning again, where she tried to tell them that she hired the hitman for herself, and due to a miscommunication, they targeted her parents instead. Obviously, no one bought this, and she ended up receiving an automatic. Sarah Barras and Brandon Machine lived with their 6 kids in South Yorkshire. The story begins when their family dog disappeared and they suspected their neighbor had taken him. That is when they decided to attempt to murder the neighbor, but thankfully they failed. After their failed murder attempt, they began to worry that the police might one day catch Sean and take all their kids into foster care. So they decided the only solution is to murder all 6 of their kids. And so later that night, before their kids went to bed, they gave their 4 youngest children ADHD pills in hopes that they would be poisoned and die overnight. Early next morning, Brandon Machine went to work and Sarah went into the kids' bedroom to check on them. She was shocked to see that all 4 kids had survived and none of them were affected by the pill. Now upset that the plan hadn't worked, she immediately called her husband Brandon to tell him that the plan had failed and began researching online for different ways to murder her kids. What she did next is unforgivable. Episode 2 coming tomorrow. These insane parents tried murdering their 6 kids multiple times. Part 2. Sorry for the wait. After their plan failing and the mom doing some research, she decided that drowning or strangulation would be the best way to get rid of their kids. Later that night, when Brandon got home, him and Sarah went into the kids' bedroom and strangled their two eldest, aged 13 and 14 at the time, with Brandon doing so with his bare hands. They then filled the bathtub up with water and attempted to drown their four youngest kids. Thankfully, this failed and all four kids survived. Now frustrated with their second failed attempt, they decided to take all four kids into a bedroom and phone the police. It is unclear why they decided to do this. Both half-brother and half-sister were sentenced to 35 years in prison and are expected to spend the rest of their lives there. Lastly, here's a quote from their mom. "I thought of every possible solution to this mess. Putting them into care, checking into the local nut house, or mass murder." Like what? This man is the real-life Pennywise. The story begins when John Wayne Gacy moved to Chicago and began working as a full-time clown. He went by Pogo the Clown and would perform for sick kids and at charity events. One morning on his day off, Gacy, aka Pogo the Clown, was driving around when he noticed a young man that seemed to be lost. The young man explained to Gacy that he was only passing through Chicago and that he was going to leave the next morning. Hearing this, Gacy offered to give the young man a tour of Chicago and even offered he spend the night at his place since the man had nowhere else to stay. The young man accepted. After allowing the young man to spend the night in his basement, Gacy woke up to the young man standing in his doorway holding a knife. Gacy, now scared for his life, leapt out of bed and charged at the young man. After wrestling the young man to the ground, Gacy was able to remove the knife from his hand and ended up puncturing the young man several times until he was left motionless. After murdering a man in what seemed to be self-defense, Gacy headed towards the kitchen to wash off the knife. But what he found in the kitchen changed him forever. This man is the real-life Pennywise Part 2. Sorry for the long wait. When Gacy walked into the kitchen, he noticed an open carton of eggs and an unsliced slab of bacon. This is because the young man was not trying to hurt Gacy, but instead made breakfast as a way to say thank you for letting him spend the night, and went over to Gacy's room to wake him up. Upon realizing this, Gacy did not feel any remorse. Instead, he felt what he described as a thrill like no other. Now seeking his thrill for murder, Gacy would dress up as a clown and lure young kids into his house. There, he would handcuff them, making them defenseless to the torture. One fateful night, a pharmacy worker overheard Gacy trying to lure one of his victims. When the victim was reported missing the next morning, the pharmacist immediately pointed the cops to Gacy. Upon searching his house, they found so many body parts that it was hard to even identify the victims. Gacy was charged with 33 murders and sentenced to death. On May 10th of 1944, Gacy died of lethal injection. This 8-year-old boy is the youngest serial murderer in the world. It was a typical day in a small village in Bihar, India, when a middle-aged woman named Devi was playing with her 6-month-old daughter on the porch of an elementary school near her house when she remembered that she had left some food on the stove. She ran home, leaving her daughter alone for only a few minutes, but when she got back, her daughter was gone. Frantic, she began searching all around the school, but to no avail. This disappearance was all too familiar to the villagers, as this was the latest in a series of strange, unexplained disappearances of young children in the village. The villagers called the police, who arrived shortly after, not knowing they were about to make a discovery that was going to shock the entire world in the coming days. You are not ready for part 2. This 8-year-old boy is the youngest serial murderer in the world. Part 2. Sorry for the wait. The cops were shocked when the villagers pointed them to an 8-year-old boy, claiming that he was the one behind all the strange disappearances. The disturbed 8-year-old boy named Aramjit lived with his extremely poor family in a village called Mushari. One day, Aramjit's 1-year-old sister strangely disappeared. Oddly, the family initially did not mention the disappearance to their close friends or neighbors, but eventually people noticed and began asking questions. The family explained the disappearance as a sudden death from natural causes, but largely avoided the topic. Concern grew larger as only a few days later, Aramjit's 8-month-old cousin also disappeared, with the family again unable to provide a clear explanation for this disappearance. Villagers began noticing 8-year-old Aramjit displaying strange behavior, even seeing him lurking around the elementary school on the day Devi's daughter disappeared. The police now took 8-year-old Aramjit to the station for questioning, but he remained silent with a chilling smile and an icy glare until he finally spoke. Part 3 coming very soon. This 8-year-old boy is the youngest serial murderer in the world. Part 3. Sorry for the wait. After a long silence, Amarjit asks the cops for a biscuit. After finishing the biscuit, he began confessing to all the gruesome crimes he had committed with no expression. He told them that his first murder was at the age of 7. He told them how he had taken his sleeping baby sister to a field near his house where he murdered her. He even described hiding her body with grass and dried leaves after strangling her and using a brick until she was left motionless. He did the same to his 8-month-old cousin, even taking her to the same field. He then took them to a different field where he had murdered a 6-month-old that he found alone at an elementary school. But the story was only beginning to unfold. Amarjeet's parents were arrested as they had played a significant role in his murder spree. They were confronted by police and confessed everything. Part 4 is the shocking finale to this insane story. This 8-year-old boy is the world's youngest serial murderer. Part 4, the finale. Both his parents confessed to knowing about the murders. On the day of Amarjeet's sister's disappearance, his parents were frantically searching for her all around the house until he came back without her. Upon asking him about her, he took his parents to the field where he had murdered her and showed them the body. Instead of reporting him, the parents tried hiding this, hoping this would be a one-time accident. But only a short time later, he repeated the same thing with his cousin, and again his parents tried hiding it. After these shocking confessions, Amarjeet was diagnosed as a sadist, finding pleasure in other people's pain. Psychiatrists concluded that his condition can be cured, and he was sentenced to 10 years in solitary confinement. It is said he was released at the age of 18 and now leads a normal life somewhere else. And Turpin lived with their 13 kids in the Texas suburbs. They register their house as a school so they can teach their kids from home, but besides that, they seem like a normal family from the outside. The kids could be seen playing in the front yard during the day and even occasionally played with a neighbor's daughter from across the street. Slowly, however, the neighbors began noticing some strange behavior. One of the neighbors saw them marching in circles through their upstairs window, while another saw the older boys in the family digging through the trash at night. One night, the Turpin's oldest daughter was seen frantically running down the street as if trying to escape. But one of the neighbors spotted her and drove her back to her house, assuming she was mentally unstable based on her malnourished and dirty appearance. After that, the parents decided to move to this house in Paris, California. On January 14th, the police received a desperate call from a 17-year-old girl claiming she had just escaped her home and that her siblings were still there captive. Only minutes later, the police arrived at the house. You won't believe what they found inside. These two insane parents kept their 13 kids captive for years. Part 2. Sorry for the wait. When the cops entered the home, they found 13